The weight of the leather satchel pressed against Elara Vance's hip, but it was nothing compared to the seismic tremor that had just erupted inside her chest. At 73, she was a woman whose life had long settled into the quiet, predictable rhythm of a fading echo. Yet here, outside the austere glass doors of Harrison and Graves, she felt an exhilarating. Inside that satchel, nestled in a manila envelope, were the documents that changed everything. 3 upscale condo units in Portland's Pearl District, and a sprawling oceanfront retreat in Astoria. A fortune, bequeathed by her late brother, Silas. The only person who had ever truly seen past the veil of her meek domesticity to the resilient spirit underneath. Elara walked with slow, deliberate steps down the busy city sidewalk. The late autumn air of Etheria Bay, sharp and cleansing. She kept touching the satchel, feeling the crisp edges of the paper through the leather, tangible proof of a future she had only dared to whisper about in her loneliest moments. For years, she had measured her existence by self-denial, by the careful subtraction of small comforts to avoid becoming a financial burden on her son, Julian, and his wife, Serafina. Now, she held the key to transforming all their lives. A gift so monumental, it felt like the universe finally compensating her for decades of quiet sacrifice. A soft, beatific smile stretched across her face. She envisioned the scene: Julian's stunned, loving embrace, Serafina's initial shock dissolving into tears of gratitude. All the years of tight budgets, the faded clothes, the postponed repairs, it would all melt away. She had something big, something meaningful, to give her family. The sheer joy of finally being the one who provided, rather than the one who needed care, was almost overwhelming. The familiar porch steps of her modest, long-paid-off home creaked beneath her sensible loafers. The scent of freshly brewed French roast hung in the air, Serafina's preferred afternoon ritual. Voices drifted from the living room. Julian and Serafina were home. Perfect timing. She wouldn't have to wait. She would drop the news like a glorious, golden bomb right now, watching their faces ignite with relief and love. This moment, she knew, would retroactively make every single sacrifice of her 50 years of motherhood worthwhile. Her hand hovered over the cool brass doorknob. But just as her fingers curled around the metal, she heard her name, Elara. It was Serafina's voice, shorn of its usual saccharine layer, flat and sharp as flint, the casual familiarity of the sound, so devoid of the feigned warmth Serafina always employed with her, froze Elara's movement mid-action. Instinct, the kind that women hone over decades of reading silent signals and decoding manipulative undertones, commanded her to stop. She drew back, pressing herself against the shadowed wall beside the slightly ajar door, holding her breath. What followed was a cascade of words that fell like shards of ice, piercing the fragile warmth of her hopeful fantasy. Serafina was speaking in her professional tone. The clipped, decisive manner Elara had heard only when she took high-stakes business calls. Never with her. With Elara, it was always that sickeningly sweet blend of forced concern and manufactured patience. "I've finalized the discussion with Dr. Alcott," Serafina stated, her voice chillingly clinical. She confirmed that with 2 more targeted evaluations, we can secure the certificate. She says it's remarkably simple. At 73, any documented forgetfulness can be easily framed as significant cognitive decline. The ground tilted beneath Elara. The walls of her familiar hallway seemed to breathe, contracting around her. Julian's voice was hesitant, muffled. "And you're absolutely certain there won't be any legal complications, Serafina?" "None," Serafina replied, the certainty in her tone ringing like a death knell. "Once we establish guardianship, we can immediately list this house, liquidate her retirement accounts, and there's nothing anyone can say. She will be placed in the Willow Creek facility. They have excellent care. Visits on weekends, if you feel the need. But honestly, Julian, we cannot continue this way. We have been carrying her financial weight for years. Carrying her? Carrying me? Elara slid down the wall, her legs refusing to bear the unbearable weight of the truth. The manila envelope, the symbol of her salvation and their prosperity, now felt like a searing iron brand against her side. 3 condos, an oceanfront home, a fortune they knew nothing about, and they were plotting to declare her incompetent, institutionalize her, and strip her of everything she possessed. "I don't know, Serafina," Julian murmured, and for a fleeting, pathetic second, a spark of maternal hope flickered. "She is my mother." "Precisely," Serafina snapped, the mask slipping completely. "She is your mother, and she is an anchor consuming everything we have. How much longer are we expected to wait? Your commercial debts are not forgiving themselves. Your business is bankrupt. We require immediate liquidity, not 5 years from now when she finally—" Serafina didn't bother to finish the sentence. She didn't need to. "Dr. Alcott can commence the full process next week," Serafina continued, her voice regaining its cold, managerial confidence. "I already have the initial commitment forms. We just need your signature. And hers. That last part is the easiest. We'll tell her it's an update for her supplemental health insurance or some minor governmental paperwork. She signs anything you place in front of her." The accuracy of that cold assessment was Elara's deepest shame. She had signed every document they had pushed her way over the last few years. She had trusted them. Blindly. Completely. She had surrendered her autonomy piece by piece, believing it was love and care. "And how much do you estimate we can fetch for the house?" Julian asked, his voice now sounding less like a dutiful son and more like a desperate business partner. Serafina sighed, a sound of smug satisfaction as they finally arrived at the core transaction. "The realtor anticipates between $250,000 and $300,000, depending on how quickly we push the sale. If we hold out, maybe more. But I say we sell fast. Between the house sale and what she has left in her savings, we can clear all the outstanding debts and still have a substantial seed investment for your next venture." "And her?" Julian pressed, the question a hollow formality. "I told you," Serafina said with a hint of exasperation. "The facility costs $2,000 a month. We can cover her expenses for years with the capital we generate. She will be comfortable. Better off. Even. She'll have 24-hour supervision, activities, professional stimulation. She'll be safer and more engaged than she is here. $2,000 a month." They were quantifying her worth, calculating the maximum duration she could be contained before her own life savings were fully liquidated. "I'm not sure I can do that to her," Julian muttered, but the conviction had evaporated from his tone. It was a mere psychological hurdle, a final, token resistance before full capitulation. "Julian, darling. Listen to me," Serafina cooed, deploying the soft, silken voice she used to dismantle his last reservations. "Your mother has lived her life. She had her marriage. She raised her son. She enjoyed her prime years. Now, it is our turn. We have the absolute right to live without this crushing burden, and she will be fine. I promise you." Silence followed, a dense, suffocating silence. Then, the voice of the man she had loved, nurtured, and defended fiercely against the world. "All right, do it, but do it quickly." Something fundamental fractured inside Elara at that instant. There was no theatrical gasp or immediate torrent of tears. It was a profound, crystalline breakage, like the soundless shattering of an immense, long-cracked bell. It felt like watching the final, foundational stone crumble from a structure she had been desperately, delusionally trying to hold upright for years. She had been willfully blind. But now, the sight was agonizingly clear. Clutching the satchel like a shield, she took a shaky, measured breath. Inside the envelope, the properties of Silas's estate, the 3 condos, and the ocean house were waiting. A secret fortune they knew nothing of. Left with the single, prescient condition Silas had written in his final letter. Elara, do not tell anyone until you are absolutely certain. Who deserves to know? Now she knew. Forcing her hands to steady, she moved silently back toward the front entrance. She opened and closed the heavy front door with a deliberate, loud thump this time. I'm home, she called out, her voice unnaturally bright, almost saccharine. A flurry of hurried movement erupted in the living room. When she stepped inside, Julian and Serafina were seated on the sofa. A picture of domestic tranquility. Julian was scrolling on his phone. Serafina was holding a coffee mug, offering a practiced, vacant smile. Hi, Mom, Julian said, standing to deliver a swift, impersonal kiss to her forehead. How did your outing go? Perfectly fine, dear, Elara replied, tucking the telltale manila envelope deep into her satchel before they could glimpse it. Just some routine insurance paperwork. Nothing of any consequence. Serafina's smile widened, a gesture Elara now understood to be a predatory baring of teeth. Would you like a cup of coffee, Elara? I just brewed a fresh pot. Yes, honey, thank you. Elara settled into her customary armchair. From this vantage point, she watched them move around the kitchen, observing every gesture, every fleeting, conspiratorial glance exchanged between them. Every slight, every subtle manipulation suddenly made terrifying, logical sense. The veiled comments about her memory, the constant, gentle suggestions that she needed more rest, every piece of paper they had coaxed her to sign over the years. They were not caring for her. They were preparing the scaffold. She took the mug Serafina offered, and offered her own perfected smile. A mask of placid, unsuspecting obedience. They didn't know the balance of power had shifted. They didn't realize the quiet, compliant woman they had just plotted to discard now commanded a financial might they couldn't even imagine. Above all, they did not know that Elara Vance, the tired, convenient widow, had just been awakened by the sound of her own shattering heart. Elara's life had been characterized by an almost pathological simplicity, raised in a generation where a woman's destiny was to nurture, to serve, and to incrementally fade so that the men in her life could prosper. She had internalized the lesson completely. She had married Robert Vance at 23. He was a decent, hard-working man, the kind who came home exhausted, but never without a weary smile for his wife. They were never wealthy, but they were never destitute. Julian, her only child after 2 earlier miscarriages, became the absolute center of her world. She loved him with an intensity that bordered on suffocation, sheltering him from every discomfort and failure. She gave him everything she had been denied, and in the process, neglected to teach him the fundamental truth that value is earned through effort, not automatically inherited by familial decree. Robert passed away 12 years ago from a sudden, massive heart attack while commuting home. He left her the house, a modest savings account, and a small, but steady, pension of $1,200 a month, just enough to cover essential upkeep. Julian was already 3 years into his marriage with Serafina by then. Initially, they spoke of her moving in with them. You can't stay alone, Mom, Julian insisted. But Elara, still robust and fiercely independent, had refused. Elara was Elara and Lara. She cherished her solitude, her well-worn routines, the quiet company of her garden. That lasted for 5 years. Then, Julian's business ventures collapsed. The specifics remained vague: corporate restructuring, budget cuts, the polite euphemisms used to conceal failure. Serafina's salary, though significant, was insufficient to maintain their expensive downtown loft, luxury car payments, and frequent upscale travel. The polite Sunday visits began to turn into more frequent, pointed conversations. Elara, this house is simply too large for one person, Serafina would remark, her eyes scanning the valuable square footage with a calculating glint. I don't feel lonely here, dear. I'm quite content, Elara countered. genuinely enjoying her peace. But think pragmatically, Mom, Julian pressed, tapping into her deepest fear. If you were to fall, if you became ill in the middle of the night, no one would know until much later. The fear of dying alone, undiscovered for days, was a vulnerability that old age brutally introduced. So, when they proposed moving in together, selling their apartment to pay off their debts, and consolidating the family unit under her roof, Ilara reluctantly consented. It will be like old times, Mom, Julian had promised. Like when I was a child. It was nothing like old times. From the day they moved in, Ilara's home ceased to be hers. Serafina immediately launched a massive, functional reorganization. Ilara's beloved antique furniture was banished to the damp basement. Her cherished watercolor paintings were replaced by Serafina's sleek, abstract pieces. Her kitchen, the sanctuary of her creativity, was entirely redesigned to Serafina's tastes. Slowly, subtly, Ilara was erased from her own space. Family meals became transactional, joyless affairs. Julian stared at his phone, perpetually preoccupied. Serafina held endless phone conversations. Ilara sat in increasingly profound silence, feeling more spectral and invisible at her own dining table with every passing day. The criticisms began almost imperceptibly. Ilara, did you add salt to this twice? It's almost inedible. Mom, I distinctly asked you to pick up the dry cleaning. We missed our reservation because you forgot. Ilara, you left the porch light on all day. You must be more careful with the utilities. Each comment was a seed of corrosive doubt planted deep into her mind. Was she truly becoming forgetful? Was her memory failing? She began a frantic, internal campaign of logging every task, double-checking every action, the anxiety tightening like a wire around her composure. As she retreated into self-doubt, they expanded their presence, their demands. Julian spent hours sequestered in Robert's old study, which he had converted into his office. He spoke of grand new businesses, lucrative investments, and global opportunities, yet no income ever materialized. What did materialize was the systematic depletion of Ilara's savings. Mom, I need to borrow $5,000, Julian would say, his voice heavy with entrepreneurial stress. It's for the business launch. I promise it's a short-term loan, repaid next month. The money never returned. Ilara, could you cover the property taxes this month? We are extremely tight right now, Serafina would ask, deploying the manipulative softness that Ilara now recognized as a weapon. Ilara always agreed. She was his mother. They were her family. Mothers sacrifice, don't they? That was the immutable law of her existence. Her $1,200 pension vanished within 3 weeks of its arrival. The $30,000 Robert had left her dwindled to $20,000, then $15,000, and finally bottomed out at a meager $8,000. She kept a hidden log, meticulously tallying every unpaid loan, every favor that had mutated into an obligation. She clung to the narrative that she was supporting her son through a temporary hardship. Serafina's manipulation was quieter but more persistent. She always had a suggestion cloaked in concern. Ilara, don't you think a physical checkup is in order? You seem more distracted lately. Or, perhaps we should put the primary accounts in Julian's name, just in case something happens to you. It's simply safer. Then, why don't you let me manage your debit card? It's cold outside. And I don't want you struggling with groceries. Every suggestion was a calculated demand for surrender. Every surrender chipped away at her independence, making her more reliant, more vulnerable. She accepted it all, rationalizing it as love, as care, as the necessary bond of family. Her friends began to fall away, not by her choice, but because every scheduled meeting was preempted by a more important, domestic necessity. Mom, you need to stay home. The plumber is coming today. Ilara, you really shouldn't go out. The forecast predicts heavy rain. and you might catch a chill. Until the phone calls stopped, and Alara, in her isolation, convinced herself that family was the only company she truly needed at her age. The only remaining tether to objective reality was her brother, Silas. He lived 3 hours away in Seattle, a successful, unmarried businessman with no children. Alara was his sole close relative, and he was the only person who saw the agonizing truth she refused to acknowledge. "Alara, that boy is exploiting you?" Silas stated bluntly during his bi-monthly visit, his gaze sharp and unwavering. "And that woman is worse. They are systematically draining you, sister." "Don't speak like that, Silas. Julian is my son, and that is precisely why I'm telling you this. I know you, Alara. You would dissolve yourself completely just to ensure his comfort." She refused to hear him. To admit he was right was to accept that she had fundamentally failed as a mother, raising a man capable of such cold-hearted exploitation. The last time Silas visited, 4 months ago, he and Julian had a ferocious argument. Alara, hiding in the kitchen, heard every devastating word. "You are stealing from your mother," Silas thundered. "She gives me the money because she wants to," Julian retorted, his voice strained. "She gives it to you because you emotionally manipulate her. You make her feel that if she doesn't rescue you, she is a bad mother. You have no right to come into my house and insult me. This isn't your house, Julian. It's your mother's. And if you possessed an ounce of integrity, you would be helping her instead of bleeding her dry." Julian threw Silas out, and Alara, the eternal coward, remained silent, allowing her son to expel the only person willing to fight for her. She never saw Silas alive again. Silas died 2 months later, a sudden, painless cerebral aneurysm. Alara attended the funeral alone. Julian claimed an urgent business meeting, and Serafina insisted that someone had to remain behind to manage the house. At the graveside service, Silas's attorney, Mr. Andrew Harrison, handed Alara a sealed envelope. "Mr. Vance left explicit instructions that you receive this personally, Mrs. Vance." The letter felt heavy, burning in her hands. It was a thick, cream-colored envelope, sealed with a distinctive red wax bearing Silas's crest. Across the front, in his familiar, decisive script, it read simply, "For Alara," to be read in absolute solitude. She waited until night. Julian and Serafina were out for a dinner with prospective investors. Alara claimed fatigue. The truth was, she needed the silent sanctuary of her room to receive her brother's final communication from beyond the grave. She sat on her bed, the bedside lamp casting a small, warm circle of light. With trembling fingers, she broke the wax seal. Inside were a lengthy, multi-page handwritten letter and a folded legal document. "My dearest Alara, if you are reading this, my time on this earth has finally concluded. Do not mourn for me. I lived a full life on my own terms. And I depart, knowing that I have done the right thing by leaving you what you are about to receive. But before you proceed, I need you to understand one thing. The contents of that legal document are to be shared with no one. Absolutely no one. Alara. Not even Julian. Especially not Julian." She paused, her heart hammering against her ribs, the premonition of truth chilling her to the core. "I know it wounds you to hear this from your own brother, but that man is no longer the son you raised. I cannot determine when he lost his way, whether it was the excessive indulgence you provided, or the moment he chose to marry that viper of a woman. But the truth is, your son is a weak, greedy man, capable of profound self-justification for his actions. And Serafina is his intellectual director. He is merely the instrument." Tears began to fall, hot and immediate, spotting the ink, but she could not stop reading. "Over these last few years, I have watched you diminish yourself. Each time I visited, you were smaller, quieter, more anxious, more absent, and those two expanded to fill your emptiness like invasive weeds. I watched you give away money you couldn't spare, sign papers you didn't understand, and surrender things that were unequivocally yours. And the most heartbreaking part? I watched you convince yourself this was all a manifestation of love. Alara pressed her hand over her mouth, stifling a ragged sob. But love is not what they are offering you, sister. Love is what you give to them without receiving anything substantial in return, save for crumbs of manufactured affection and mountains of manipulative guilt. I tried to open your eyes. God knows I tried. But you are stubborn, Alara. You always have been. Therefore, I chose to take a different approach. I chose to protect you. Even from your own boundless, misplaced generosity. With hands that shook violently, she unfolded the legal document. It was Silas's last will and testament. As she read the official language, the world seemed to freeze. Her brother had bequeathed her his entire estate, 3 premium condo units in the most sought-after part of Portland, each valued conservatively at $150,000, and the magnificent oceanfront house on the rugged Oregon coast. A property valued in the document at approximately $350,000. In total, nearly $800,000 in liquid and real property assets. She had to read the figures 3 times to believe the overwhelming magnitude of the gift. Silas had no spouse or children. She was his sole heir. It was all hers. She returned to the letter, barely able to hold the heavy paper. These assets belong to you, and no one else. I have given clear, ironclad instructions to my attorney, Mr. Andrew Harrison. He will contact you shortly to finalize the property transfer. But Alara, hear this with every fiber of your being. Do not tell Julian or Serafina anything until you are absolutely 100% certain they will not attempt to seize it from you. And believe me, they will try. Silas knew her better than she knew herself. Her immediate, ingrained instinct was to share it, to alleviate Julian's financial stress, to prove her ongoing usefulness. I am begging you, sister, do not do it. See how they conduct themselves when they believe you possess nothing of material value. That is the moment you will see their true selves. She turned to the final page. I have navigated this world for 75 years, Alara, encountering the best and the worst of humanity. I can assure you, your daughter-in-law ranks among the latter. That woman does not love you. You are a means to an end, and that end is whatever she can extract from you. Julian is spineless. She is his master manipulator. If you reveal this inheritance, within a week they will pressure you into surrendering everything. They will concoct fictional crises, debts, and illnesses. They will weaponize your guilt against your current wealth. And you will surrender, because you always do. He was devastatingly right. He knew her default setting. Therefore, I ask you for this one act of pure self-preservation, dear sister. Be selfish for the first and last time in your life. Guard this secret. Protect what is rightfully yours. And should you ever feel endangered, unduly pressured, or forced to perform any action against your will, call Mr. Harrison immediately. I have prepaid his services to represent you and defend your assets. You will not have to spend a single penny. The letter ended with a simple, yet heartbreaking valediction. I have always loved you, Alara. You were the finest sister a man could ever ask for. Now, it is your time to be good to yourself. Do not let them dismantle you. Do not give them that power. And if you ever doubt your actions, remember this truth. People who genuinely love you do not need you to be broken or impoverished to feel complete. With all my everlasting love, your brother, Silas. Alara cried until she was utterly empty. She wept for Silas, for his unwavering loyalty. She wept for herself, for the years she had spent willfully shrinking, and she wept for Julian, for the beloved child he had been, and the hollow, avaricious man he had become. The next day, she called Mr. Andrew Harrison. He was a man in his 50s with a reassuringly calm, formal demeanor. He scheduled an appointment for the following Tuesday. Mr. Vance was exceptionally precise in his directives. Mrs. Vance, he confirmed, reviewing the extensive documentation. These properties are yours without any attached condition. The condo units are currently fully leased, generating a total monthly income of approximately $4,500. That income has been accumulating in a protected account since Mr. Vance's passing. There is currently over $9,000 immediately available to you. Alara could only nod, mute with shock. The coastal house is vacant. Your brother used it sparingly, but it is impeccably maintained, fully furnished, and all utilities are current. It is prepared for your immediate occupancy should you desire it. And what must I do? She finally managed to ask. Nothing strenuous, ma'am. Simply sign the transfer deeds before a notary public. The legal process takes approximately 2 weeks. After that, all assets will be officially, legally, in your name. And no one can take it from me? Mr. Harrison met her gaze intently. No one, Mrs. Vance. These properties are yours by testamentary right. No one can claim them, sell them, or dispose of them without your expressed and notarized consent. Your brother engineered this perfectly. It was then that Alara told him everything. She poured out the painful narrative, the money disappearing, Serafina's comments about her memory, the sense of growing isolation. He listened without a single interruption. When she concluded, he nodded slowly. Your brother had a strong suspicion this was occurring, he said quietly. Hence his very specific instructions. Mrs. Vance, I cannot instruct you on how to manage your family, but I can guarantee this. If at any point you feel you are being coerced to sign anything, to grant consent, or if you feel any element of personal risk, you call me immediately, day or night. I will protect your interests. It is the promise I made to Silas. He provided his personal and office numbers. Alara placed the card in the safest, most intimate place she could conceive of, the interior pocket of her bra. They signed the initial paperwork that day. Mr. Harrison informed her that she would return in 2 weeks for the final, notarized signing, and that moment would be the official transfer of power. In the interim, he advised, I implore you, mention absolutely none of this to anyone. Understood, she replied, the word feeling utterly inadequate. But as she drove back to her house, the preliminary documents secured in her satchel, she felt an emotion she hadn't recognized in decades. It was a potent combination of hope and a slow, creeping sense of power. For the first time, she possessed a secret, an escape route, an ace she could play. And then, just as she was about to confess everything, her mother's heart still battling her survival instinct, she heard them plotting her total destruction. The days following that conversation were lived in a state of suspended, agonizing awareness. Alara moved through the house like a phantom, forced to observe the living without being able to truly interact. She maintained the required smiles, the docile nods, but inside, she was utterly awake. Her senses painfully acute, cataloging every detail with the clarity of a person facing a lethal threat. Memories long buried beneath a lifetime of denial now resurfaced, taking on monstrous new meanings. It was as if a brilliant light had been switched on in a profoundly dark room, revealing every meticulously placed snare. She remembered the home insurance renewal 6 months ago. It's just to update the policy, Alara, Serafina had said, her sweet mask firmly in place. Just your signature, here and here. Alara had signed without reading. She now wondered what deeper legal mechanism she had inadvertently authorized that day. She recalled the subtle pressure when Julian convinced her to add his name to her main bank account. It's purely for an emergency, Mom. That way, if something happens, I can access funds immediately for your medication. A precaution, indeed, for him. Since that day, Her savings had hemorrhaged with terrifying speed. She remembered the detailed medical visits Serafina had scheduled last year. Just a routine senior checkup. Elara. The doctor's strange, pointed questions about her ability to manage finances, her sense of orientation, and her tendency to forget things. She had dismissed them as normal geriatric inquiries. But now she understood. They were building a dossier. They were systematically documenting her minor frailties as evidence of impending incompetence. The isolation from her friends had been equally insidious. It began with Caroline, her friend of 50 years. They had planned a lunch. Elara was dressed, waiting. When Serafina appeared, face tight with feigned concern. "Elara," Caroline called. She said she had to cancel, apparently. Her daughter is quite ill. Elara believed her, sending a text wishing Caroline well. Caroline's confused reply was devastating. "What are you talking about? I waited 2 hours at the restaurant. Did you forget our date, Elara?" When Elara showed the message to Serafina, she smoothly denied it. "Perhaps you misheard me, Elara. Perhaps you dreamed I told you?" And Elara, tragically, began to doubt her own mind. Then it was Linda. Then Harriet. One by one, her independent social connections were severed, leaving her solely reliant on Julian and Serafina. She remembered the last time she wanted to go to the bank alone. Serafina insisted on accompanying her. "The neighborhood can be quite risky, Elara. I won't have you taking chances." At the bank, Serafina spoke on her behalf, managing the transactions. The teller, conditioned to ignore the elderly, never met Elara's eye. To the outside world, Elara was already a dependent non-entity. She vividly recalled the strategically timed conversations Julian and Serafina would have, always within earshot, concerning their profound debts. "I don't know how we're going to cover this month. The creditors are circling. If we don't get capital soon, we will lose everything." And Elara, predictable as a fixed star, would rush to the rescue. "I have some savings, son. We can use that for now." She now realized these conversations were not accidental. They were meticulously staged theatrical performances designed to weaponize her maternal guilt, forcing her to be the indispensable rescuer. And then there were the brochures for senior living communities that Serafina strategically left on the dining table. Bright, cheerful propaganda, detailing 24-hour nursing and endless activities. Julian would support the suggestion with comments like, "You look so bored here, Mom. At those places you'd have people to talk to, things to do." What they meant was, in those places, you would be safely locked away, and we would have your house, mortgage-free. Last week, Serafina had brewed her a special evening tea. "It's a soothing blend to help you sleep better, Elara. You've been so restless lately." Elara drank it without suspicion and slept for nearly 12 straight hours, waking groggy and disoriented. Serafina seized the moment. "See, Elara? That's how you are lately." Confused. "We absolutely must talk to Dr. Alcott." Elara now recoiled at the memory, wondering what mild sedative Serafina had laced into her final cup of trust. The accumulation of these memories struck her like successive tidal waves. Each memory was a small, calculated betrayal, combining to form a meticulous, predatory scheme to isolate her, drain her, declare her incompetent, and usurp all her remaining assets. But they were catastrophically ignorant of 3 things. First, Elara had listened. She knew their entire playbook. Second, she now possessed nearly $800,000 in untraceable property that they did not know existed. Third, Elara Vance, the quiet, compliant widow, was now awake, and a 73-year-old woman who has survived widowhood, poverty, and years of silent, soul-crushing manipulation is exponentially stronger than any greedy daughter-in-law could ever anticipate. That night, while they slept, Elara retrieved an old, leather-bound notebook Robert had given her decades ago. It had remained unused. Now, it had its singular, true purpose. On the first page, she wrote. The Defense Diary of Ilara Vance. She began to write everything down, every suspicious date, every manipulative conversation, every paper they had coerced her into signing, every incidence of isolation from her friends, every comment about her memory, every cryptic doctor's visit. She also logged Mr. Andrew Harrison's name and number, the details of Silas's inheritance, and the critical date. The final notarized signing was scheduled for 10 days from now. She had to survive those 10 days without raising a flicker of suspicion. The next day, she went out for a long, slow walk, ostensibly to enjoy the autumn air. She found a payphone. She dared not use her cell phone, as Julian had configured it for her safety months ago, likely granting him access to all her calls and messages. She called Caroline. Ilara, where on earth have you been? Caroline's voice was anxious. I've tried calling so many times, but your daughter-in-law always says you're resting or unwell. Caroline, I need you to listen to me, and you must tell absolutely no one about this, Ilara whispered urgently, then recounted every word she had overheard, every chilling detail of the plot. A long, heavy silence stretched across the line. Ilara, you must leave that house, Caroline finally stated, her voice shaking with outrage. Those people are dangerous, criminal, I know. But I cannot yet. I have a critical legal deadline. 10 more days. I only need to endure for 10 more days. What if, in those 10 days, they make you sign something? What if they take you to the doctor and manage to have you declared incompetent before then? I am not signing anything else. And if they attempt to take me to the doctor, I will refuse. I will create a catastrophic scene if necessary. Caroline sighed, a sound of profound relief and fear combined. You have my number. Any hour, day or night, you call me. And if I do not hear from you in 2 days, I am coming to that house, and I promise you I will unleash the most spectacular scandal that city has ever witnessed. Thank you, Caroline. You are the only true friend I have left. I was always your friend, Ilara. I was the one who stopped insisting. I should have realized what was happening. When Ilara hung up, a massive, leaden weight lifted from her chest. Someone else knew the truth. Someone else was standing guard. She was no longer fighting this battle in total isolation. That afternoon, Serafina found Ilara in the kitchen, preparing her ritualistic cup of afternoon tea. Ilara, we need to have a serious talk, Serafina announced, using the gravitas of her business voice. Oh, tell me, dear, Ilara replied, the mask of placid obedience firmly in place. Julian and I are quite concerned about you. We've noticed your memory lapses are increasing. We love you, and we just want to ensure your safety and well-being. We've decided we need to move forward with the plan to